the Balancing Act podcast with SingerLewak. Today we're introducing the second episode in our Building Blocks for Business Success series, focusing on a topic that plays a critical role in organizational growth: executive compensation. Joining us are Harriet Oberman, partner at SingerLewak, our host, Mike Mondelli, director in SingerLewak's Tax Advisory Group, and our guest, Susan Schroeder, partner at Compensation Advisory Partners. Together, they'll explore how thoughtful compensation design supports long-term strategy for private companies, family-owned businesses, and tax-exempt organizations. Let's get started.
So we're talking about executive compensation today. So let's discuss why executive comp planning matters and how strategic pay design is an important part of building sustainable business success. Sue, what would you say are some of the core philosophies that should be part of designing an executive comp plan?
The main one is that compensation has to tie to business strategy. It's a tool to support the strategic direction of the company. Also, there should be a link to the financial performance and objectives of the company, because pay is very closely aligned with performance and with company size.
Harriet, when your clients are asking you about executive compensation, what topics do they already know about versus the ones that you have to bring up to them? Do they already consider performance, competitiveness, balancing short-term and long-term incentives, or do you find that you have to help them understand what a lot of the different options are?
So when I consult with clients, I think a lot of people are, depending on how sophisticated they are with strategy and strategic planning in their business, a lot of clients tend to be focused on their short-term goals. So they look at more ensuring that their salaries are competitive and short-term annual bonuses, but they don't necessarily look at their long-term strategic planning to make sure that their long-term goals, 2, 3, 4 years out, meet their strategic goals are aligned with their pay, and those would be different incentives from annual bonus. Would be like long-term incentive plans to make sure that your top talent is meeting your goals to achieve whatever financial and other goals the company has. I mostly deal with private companies, and with private companies, companies are usually looking at phantom incentive plans. So phantom incentive plans, for people that don't know, are sort of like fake stock. So it's not true equity in the company, but it is a plan that gives cash payouts at certain time points, their long-term goals. And those goals might be, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years out, or even longer, depending on how the plan is set up.
So what would make a phantom equity plan attract for a private company? This gives some of the employees something that's equity-like without being real equity in the company?
So a phantom plan is not true equity in the company. So if you have, stock in a company, you might have voting rights and other characteristics that come with having stock. But phantom stock is sort of a fake stock or fake equity in the company, where the growth in the company tracks alongside of that, but it has none of the complexity that having true stock in a company has. You don't need to track stock and capital tables like you do with true stock. There also doesn't dilute the ownership in the company. So a lot of times in closely held businesses, the owners don't want to give any of the true ownership to their employees, but they want them to be vested in the success. So it allows not to have dilution, not giving away ownership, and to kind of simplify the tracking.
It's a type of plan that really aligns the management team with the owner's interests. And if designed properly, it can deliver the same economic value as if you had real stock. What owners are worried about is they don't want minority ownership, but they're willing to share the economic value, because if the overall company grows, owners win, and then management also wins. And it's a very good vehicle to have, especially if you're considering a liquidity event of some nature in the near future. If you're not, then the other type of long-term incentive vehicle to consider is what we call a long-term cash plan. And think of that as a bonus that is paid out after 3 years instead of after 1 year, but it's tied to long-term goals instead of short-term goals. So those are really the two prevalent designs that we see in private companies, either the phantom stock or this long-term cash. The overall trend to see more and more private companies, and even some of the nonprofits we're seeing actually, developing these plans in order to attract and retain talent.
Are there any compliance issues that come up organizations should keep in mind, timing of when these are issued or any tax compliance or other tax treatment that they need to consider in these plans?
Yeah, so for the tax treatment of a phantom plan, for the company, they do not record the expense until the employee receives the cash in most circumstances. So if you have a phantom equity plan and you reach the milestone where the employee gets paid out, that is when the company would record the expense and the deduction for income tax purposes. So it's important to note for the employee side that the payout of a phantom equity plan is just considered wages to them and compensation, and it will be paid out in their W-2, and it is subject to federal income tax withholding at that time. So there's a matching between the company records the deduction and the employee receives the wages, the phantom stock, and that's when federal income taxes are withheld. It's important to note that the phantom plans are considered deferred compensation plans, and as long as they meet the criteria for deferred compensation plans, actually payroll taxes, so FICA taxes, are withheld when the stock vests. So that's important to note that so assuming that an employee has already met their Social Security threshold for the year, that Medicare taxes for the employer and the employee will need to be withheld when the stock vests, not when it's paid out. So there's not a matching for FICA, payroll taxes, and income taxes.
And I think it's worth noting that when we talk about private companies, different types of private companies, right? Many types, right? And actually, there's way more private companies in the U.S. than public companies, right? So in our research, we're seeing about 20% of private companies actually giving the real stock, either stock options or restricted stock. And so typically, like your tech companies in Silicon Valley, they're giving real stock options. And as private companies, we also have some financial services clients that are doing that, and it's the real stock. So then that's a whole nother set of issues because you have to do evaluation and you have to have liquidity and all that sort of. Some of these plans are like there's no liquidity until there's actual sale or IPO. So that's a different type of company. Then we also have the private equity, which is very, very popular, right? Private equity companies. And in their portfolio companies, a lot of those are real stock. Their goal is to have a liquidity event, say in 5 to 7 years, something like that. So this is a very complex area and it's very creative and there's lots of things to do. And you really have to define up front what your objectives are. And then you can decide what the appropriate vehicle is and then consult with Harriet on the tax treatment and accounting treatment and such. But it's critical to understand what you're trying to do and what if you're trying to retain, reward, what you're trying to do, and then decide what vehicle is appropriate. And then you can get very, very creative as a private company, actually more so than a public company, because a public company has a lot of constraints from outside regulators and SEC and such, right? That's why it's fun for us at CAP to do a lot of private company work because it's very creative.
And Sue, like what I've seen is that clients are being creative, especially in sort of larger private companies or maybe some startups in the tech industry, to compete for talent from public companies? Is that what you see in your work as well?
Yeah, well, that's what's driving it, Harriet, is that, they're attracting executive talent from public companies that might be used to getting some kind of equity incentives, right? So how do you match that or exceed that, right? And so when you don't have a publicly traded liquid stock, right? So they do it in a lot in cash. So typically the pay mix for a private company is going to be more based in cash, like, because when you don't have a liquid stock, it's very difficult completely close that gap. So they do it in other ways, because it's all about attracting and then retaining and rewarding this high level talent to run the business.
Yeah, the compensation really has to be used as a tool in succession planning.
Yeah.
I guess if you had sort of a founder-led business or mission-driven organization, maybe they are getting ready to transition out and have new leadership come in. How do you use compensation as a tool, both for the exiting founder or maybe for the next generation of executives who are coming in to lead?
That's right. That's a good point, Mike, because you want to make sure that your next level down of high potential and future leaders have so to speak, skin in the game, or can see how their efforts, they can build wealth. They can have a wealth accumulation opportunity through their work.
Yeah, what kind of metrics or targets or work best for like multi-year incentive plans, if you're in a private or a not-for-profit environment, and how do you select which metrics you're going to use for determining your comp plan that really drive long-term value to the organization, rather than just encouraging short-term decision making that might be really good for the person who's trying to get that comp level hit versus the long-term interests of the organization?
Well, that's where it gets fun, where this whole pay for performance alignment comes in. But I would say overall, the main measure is some type of profitability measure. And there's many different ways to measure profit, but the key measure is profitability. And then the next one after that is some kind of revenue or revenue growth metric. So that's by far the biggest drivers. Now, with the tax exempt and nonprofit, the more mission driven, we're going to see more of an emphasis on measures, because some of them are quantitative, but some are more qualitative, like the satisfaction measures, like customer satisfaction, service and quality measures, that kind of thing. That's typically what we would see in a nonprofit, whereas profit and revenue we see in the for-profit.
When it comes to governance, what's the role of a board or compensation committee in setting and then overseeing the executive compensation, either for a private or a tax-exempt entity?
Well, yeah, the governance is critical, and all of our clients, public, private, nonprofit, everyone has boards, and we're seeing a lot of evolution in boards of private companies to be more having more independent directors. Of course, on your public companies and your tax exempt, they're independent directors, but the private companies we're seeing more and more, and it's really for not day-to-day management. It's more oversight, more strategic oversight, advising the CEO, succession planning. Those are kind of the key roles of the board, and the compensation committee plays. And some of the private companies don't have committees. The full board does it. Some have committees, but what the role of the compensation committee is really to be like an independent third-party overseer of compensation, especially in like family businesses and things where there's some family members working in the business and some that aren't, and to help with any conflicts there. But the board plays a valuable role in many respects, and that's why we're seeing most of our clients have boards of some nature.
Mike, I wanted to go back to something you said about like succession planning. What I've found when I work a lot with closely held businesses, especially family businesses where they've mostly had family. And, with the baby boomer generation aging and they're looking to sell a lot of their businesses or move it to the next generation, it takes a lot of education to, educate maybe the founder or that next level of family on these different compensation plans, because they may not be as sophisticated, but as they want to bring in outside operators to, have their business either be sold or to go to the next generation, they really need to change their compensation structure to bring in this talent. And for a lot of them, it's really eye-opening to a new way of thinking, where before, they just maybe paid somebody an annual salary and a bonus, but now they need to look at, what is the future of the company and how we change the pay and bring in new operators to the business.
Yeah, if they're going to do that, they can't do it at the last minute. Right?
No.
They have to really be thoughtful, be starting to plan that probably several years out if they're really on the ball, and not trying to make some decisions that they wish in hindsight that they hadn't made.
Yeah, if they're really thoughtful about their succession, or if they are thinking about exit and selling, really 2 to 3 years for the comp planning and other planning for exit planning really makes the business as valuable as possible.
Yeah, that's right. But you would be amazed by how many they pass away, and then all of a sudden their kids are having inherited this business and hadn't really been involved. And yeah, we see that a lot, and then try to help them. But yeah, we've seen a big change in this area, especially as the baby boomers are, aging out here. And one thing we suggest to clients is to go to conferences or educate themselves, all the different generations. And there's a lot of great groups out there that have conferences or seminars or things just for this very issue, for the family business succession. So that's very helpful, because then they can, talk to others that are in the same boat, right? And share best practices and see kind of what the evolution is and what's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I bet going to those events and hearing about those things and then working with experts like yourself, Sue, probably helps them see some things that they would never have seen on their own, because they're probably focused mostly on turning over the operational controls.
That's right.
And they're not looking at this without being aware that they need to look at this.
That's right. And that's why they should rely on advisors and their attorneys, and then comp consultants and all of us outside advisors for help. Because that's one great thing is we've seen, both Harriet and I have been practicing for a long time, and we've seen all different kinds of companies and scenarios. And so we've seen it before, and we can say, oh yeah, okay, this is how you should do it, and here's some alternatives. And
so let's say you're in a M&A event, or there's some transition that's happened. What happens to some of those incentives we were discussing earlier at that point? The phantom equity, deferred comp, or if you had a retention bonus in place or something like that. Now there's a change in control, change in ownership. What happens to some of those long-term incentives?
Yeah. So again, if properly designed, that would have been part of the plan design and the plan document of what happens. So because when we design plans, we try to think about all the possible scenarios and then plan for that. So typically in an M&A where you have a defined total change of control, typically the incentives vest and are paid out at whatever the deal value is. And same, the retention bonuses are a tricky thing, because that could continue actually, because there's some retention bonuses that where you build them so that the executives will stay on with the new owner and stuff, but that gets tricky. I would say the majority, everything pays out, because that's what the incentive was, right, to get to this deal, whatever it is, sale, IPO, or whatever incentives that you design or whatever comp program, it has to be rooted in the culture and the values of the company. And so when we start every assignment, we get to know the company and do a lot of interviews to understand the culture and make sure that whatever we design is a good fit. Because especially in the private companies and the mission-driven, tax-exempt organization, culture is really key, and that's how they've built their business based around a certain culture. And we want to maintain that and not have any unintentional adverse consequences that might impact that culture in a negative way. We want to reinforce it, right?
Yeah, I mean, companies spend so much time building their culture that, as Sue said, you don't want unintended actions to happen that, where executive team members feel misaligned or start, being at odds with each other by their pay plan. You want it to bring people together based on, the culture that the company has built.
Yeah, and I think the whole issue of paid transparency is really sweeping the country. In California, we already have that where, every position that's posted from executive on down, you have to post it with at least a salary range, right? And so I think the whole issue of pay transparency and how your pay is being determined and all of that.
And there is a great deal of information out there based on industry or employee base size, company size, in terms of public company information that's available, or even nonprofits and their Form 990 disclosures. So there is information out there that can help inform. But not everyone goes out to do all the research on that, right? That's where your consultants come in that have the data.
Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal information. Oh, my neighbor gets paid, all this money for doing this. Why am I not that, right? And there's a lot of that kind of stuff going around that, and so HR professionals try to help that and say, oh no, here's our process and how we determine it and all of that. So
because I think there's always the tendency for employees to talk amongst themselves, as Sue said, or social media and other places today where lots of information is out there and it might not be correct. So it's part of the team to educate employees and executives and really understand the plan.
All right. Anything else to add before we wrap up our episode?
We touched on a lot of topics, and hopefully the audience understands that this is it's a complicated topic and it's very customized, especially when we're talking about private companies and even the tax exempt organizations, right? And so there's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's something you want to make sure that your pay programs are appropriate and not having unintended negative consequences. You want to use them as a support mechanism and to be helpful for growth.
So I just really encourage, my clients and listeners to get a good team around them because it is a very complex topic, and you want to make sure that whatever plan you put in place aligns with your long-term goals. And so it's not something that if you're not trained in this area that you can just put together on your own and be successful. So you really want to get a team of professionals around you to be able to develop a plan to kind of meet your goals.
Well, Harriet and Susan, I want to give you both a huge thank you for sharing your insights on executive compensation. And if today's discussion sparked some questions, or if you'd like a fresh look at your organization's current compensation plans, we invite you to reach out to SingerLewak and Compensation Advisory Partners, where Harriet, Susan, and their teams can help you navigate compensation design, long-term incentive planning, and governance best practices. Thank you for listening to The Balancing Act, and be sure to join us next month for the next episode in our Building Blocks for Business Success series.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Balancing Act podcast. If you'd like support evaluating or designing a compensation program that aligns with your goals, the team at SingerLewak is here to help. Be sure to join us for our next episode, airing in March, Tax Insights for the 2025 filing season. We'll see you next time.